the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Good evening, friends, and welcome to Crime and Punishment. I believe this is the 95th episode of Crime and Punishment. A legal podcast, not a political one. Please do not ban us from YouTube or take away my blue check mark. This is the official podcast of the Invictus Law Firm, PA, a criminal defense law firm in Orlando, Florida. The website for which is augustusinvictus.com. And that is me, yours truly, the host of this program. We're going to discuss tonight, I guess, not a lot. I mean, the news has been pretty slow this week and the past couple weeks. I'm not really sure what we're going to talk about. Let's go to Twitter, which you can find at Emperor Invictus. I guess it's X. Find it at Emperor Invictus on X. Let's see what we've got there. I would give you the viral style link, but I don't have it up, and I'm not messing with that today. Let's see. Oh, right. The President of the United States was convicted on 34 felony counts. I guess that's pretty important. The American Republic has just collapsed in front of our eyes this week. Huge development. I mean, we are witnessing history unfold. It's amazing. What a time to be alive. I love this one here, this video. I won't play the video. I'm not that high tech, but I'll play you the audio. It's Biden at a press conference, and they ask, what's your response to Trump saying that he's a political prisoner and blaming you directly? And then he just smiles at the camera.
Mr. President, can you tell us, sir, Donald Trump refers to himself as a political prisoner and blames you directly. What's your response to that, sir?
He just turns and looks, and he just gives this big smile.
Do you think the conviction will have an impact on the campaign?
And he just turns, and he walks away.
We'd love to hear your thoughts, sir.
Should he be on the ballot, sir?
And he just walks out of the room.
President.
Amazing. Not even trying to hide it. Everything we were told in the Cold War, everything we were told growing up about the Soviet Union this, the Soviet Union that, America's better, America would never do that, that's why we love America, God bless the USA, it's here now. Amazing from the guy who's always talking about Putin this, Putin that. Putin, look at him, rigging elections. Look at Putin jailing his political opponents. Look at all the human rights abuses by Putin. And now you've got the President of the United States jailing his leading political opponent and then smiling about it when he's called out on it. Got another tweet here about how President Trump now has 11 times as many felony charges as Al Capone. Amazing. Got so much going on here. Cost of Glory, which is one of my two favorite podcasts. The other being How to Take Over the World. Cost of Glory is comparing this to, the political prosecutions in the Roman Republic. In fact, you might have noticed Elon Musk did the same thing. Elon Musk talks a lot about Sola. And Cost of Glory actually did the first podcast I ever heard, the first episode I ever heard of Cost of Glory was the one about Sola. And I was like, this is the best podcast ever. Musk talks about him a lot. And one of the things I've said on this program forever is that no one quite understands what the age of prescriptions was when people started just wiping out their political opponents, imprisoning them, more often killing them and taking their property, exiling their families. When Sola came into power and did his prescriptions, it was because of the prescriptions before, under Marius. And that's what Elon Musk tweeted earlier this week, was that the prescriptions of Marius led to the prescriptions of Sola. And one of the most famous stories of the young Julius Caesar is that when Sola was dictator, he ordered Caesar to divorce his wife because his wife was of the family of the very people that Sola was putting to the ban or proscribing. And Caesar said, no, I'm not doing that. His sentimental attachment to his wife notwithstanding, it was because he did not want to be told what to do by anyone. And so he ran out in the hills, was hiding with family members here and there, dodging Sulla's soldiers. And ultimately, an appeal was made on his behalf, and Sulla ended it. But that's one of the famous stories. Point being, this has already happened before. And I had this reflection earlier this week that this thing we had when we were all libertarians or survivalists or whatever you were before, before the Charlottesville and post-Charlottesville era that we're living in now. We had this notion that, well, when the federal government collapses, and it all, shit hits the fan, as they say. Well, this is going to happen. We're going to do this. And then, you'll need to know homesteading and, you'll need your guns. And, we all have this vision of, well, when the government collapses and this system collapses and this and that happens. I think that a lot of that is just the same thing that you see in like zombie movies, post-apocalypse movies, all these dystopian future movies where everything's collapsed and now there's a wilderness and there's all these crazy things and people are eating each other, or whatever it is, whatever the movie is in that case. It's all this collective fantasy of we are tired and we want to let go of the reins of power. And we don't want to live in this prison, essentially, that has been created in America. We have this most powerful empire in the world. And despite all that power, we're imprisoned here in myriad ways. You don't need me to go in a rant about it. You already know. And I think a lot of this, post-apocalypse, future, dystopian, wasteland kind of scenario, I think it's this collective hope that one day we'll be free of that and America will be a frontier again. And we'll be able to create something out of this waste, out of this nothingness. Nuclear holocaust, great, because then we can build something out of the ashes. I think that was our fantasy for a long time. And at a certain point, you have to face the fact that power goes on and the world goes on. And when the Roman Empire fell, it wasn't just nothingness and a wilderness and a wasteland that, the good people of the Roman Empire got to face a frontier and build things again. There was still power, local powers. There were kings. There were tribes. There were people to answer to. There were societies. Nothing ever comes to just nothing. And so the government did not collapse in the United States. The Federal Reserve did not collapse. The monetary system just keeps going. The housing bubble, if it collapses, it collapses, and then the system just keeps going on. And if they succeed in tearing down Trump, the federal government is not going to collapse just because, now half of America, or maybe more, knows the system's corrupt now. There's a lot of people on Twitter right now saying, well, now everybody knows. Now everybody knows that the courts are corrupt. That we have political prosecutions in America now. Now everybody knows the judicial system, this whole court process, this whole thing we've got going that we've said, rule of law this, and no one's above the law that. Now everybody knows it's a fraud. And now it's all just going to collapse like a house of cards. No, it's not. Did it collapse in Cuba? Did it collapse in the Soviet Union? I mean, obviously the Soviet Union ultimately collapsed in the end, but did those courts collapse because everyone knew they were illegitimate? No. The Soviet Union did not collapse because people found out that their elections were fraudulent, or because people found out that their courts were corrupt, or people found out they were living under a tyranny. That's not why it collapsed. It's not why the British Empire collapsed. Empires don't collapse because people find out that there's no impartiality in the courtroom. We have just embarked upon this new era in American history with Trump's convictions here. Whether he wins or not, I won't say it's immaterial. Obviously, it would be huge if he won despite this. It would be huge if he lost because of this. Either way you cut it, though, the American Republic is over. It's over. There's no coming back from this. When Trump gets into office, how can he possibly not put Biden on trial? How could he not round up all the Democrats behind this? How could he not put all of the deep state on trial for this? Round them up and imprison them. After this, what choice does he have? Now, when he won in 2016 and the whole campaign slogan was lock her up because Clinton was a criminal, he didn't do that. Back then it was just campaign rhetoric. Now, it's a little too real. He cannot get into office and not execute vengeance now. After the prescriptions of Marius, Sulla couldn't come in as dictator and just, be the reasonable guy. Now, that's actually what Caesar did when Caesar came to power. He was the reasonable guy. He showed mercy to all of his enemies. He forgave everybody, famously. Merciful to a fault because those very people he forgave literally stabbed him in the back on the Senate floor. When Octavian rose to power, he did not make that mistake. He and Lepidus and Antony, they executed everybody who was a problem, and they took their property. And that is the way it was from that point forward. No one made that mistake again. So if Trump comes to power, there is no way that this is not going to be a total dictatorship. Because if it's anything less, it's just suicide. Let's check the chat. Oh, there are people in the chat. How about that? Aleph, the Nemesis. Good evening. Tampa Vikings. Hey, man. Now that I know who you are. Good evening, brother. Old Warmonger West the Great as a name. Old Warmonger West the Great. Just got settled in at an Airbnb. Now it's time for Augustus to chill. And chill. All right. Edonius. Good evening. Brian. Good evening from the east, buddy. Let's keep going on the Twitter again. We're at Emperor Invictus on Twitter. In case you don't know, that's where all these fire tweets are. Oh, you know what? I forgot. I made this meme, and I meant to make this the backdrop for tonight. Did not get nearly enough credit for this meme on Twitter. So Tucker's comment, import the third world, become the third world. That's what we just saw. This won't stop Trump. He'll win the election if he's not killed first. But it does mark the end of the fairest justice system in the world. Anyone who defends this verdict is a danger to you and your family. So I don't know about import the third world, become the third world. I can't comment on that because I didn't see the jury. The only thing I've heard about the jury is that 2 attorneys were on it, which is, in my opinion, extremely rare. No one wants attorneys on the jury on either side because those attorneys are going to have their own thoughts on what's going on. They're kind of like an X factor. If there were, if the whole jury was comprised of third world immigrants, that would totally justify what Carl Tucker's saying, but I have no idea, so I can't comment on that. But I can say Elon Musk's comment on the trial was top-notch. Kessler commented on it, saying, everyone said this was the weakest case out of the bunch. Trump is going to go from a 77 years clean record. Man, he's 77. To hundreds of felonies, as he just so happens to be running for president. Quote, show trials don't happen in America and juries don't persecute political enemies, end quote. Yeah, that's going around, isn't it? You think of poor Kyle Rittenhouse, man, the show trial they put on for him, they were out for blood. And you could point to the prosecutors in Trump's cases, maybe, Smith for one, but look at Fannie Willis, Letitia What's-Her-Face, and Alvin Bragg. And they all suspiciously have this one thing in common, but not Jack Smith, not whatever that retard prosecutor's name was in the Rittenhouse case. A lot of these prosecutors are just out of control, and now it's just the fashion. There used to be this doctrine about vagueness in a law being unconstitutional. Prosecutors can't just interpret these statutes in whatever way they please. There has to be specifically prohibited conduct in order to be criminally liable under a statute. That's how it was explained to me growing up, when I was growing up in the Cold War, at the tail end of the Cold War, granted, but my father lived through the Cold War. He was a lawyer. Explained this distinction to me repeatedly when I was a kid. Because I was raised to be a lawyer from the time I was born. And he would always say, the difference between the Anglo-American tradition that we've had it for 1,000 years, and the Soviet system of government is that, here we have to have something specifically prohibited or prescribed by the law for it to be illegal. In the Soviet system, it's, well, we judges can interpret this and you should have known this was illegal, and we don't like where you're coming from, or we don't like your politics, or we don't like the way you did this, so we're going to interpret it this way and you're going to prison. That was always understood in America to be tyrannical. That is not a justice system. That is a corrupt justice system. And now it's just the fashion in America. In my own prosecution in South Carolina, this woman, this prosecutor, actually said to a judge, well, the South Carolina statute on kidnapping is vague, so we can't interpret it like this. That kind of argument by a prosecutor would be inconceivable, a mere 10 years ago. And now they can balls out say, well, this statute is vague, so this interpretation works, Your Honor. And they can say it with a straight face, not realizing that they are the fall of America. You look at the J6 cases, for instance, and these guys are charged under the Enron statute. Because, those guys at Enron, they were destroying all these documents, and they're like, well, how do we prosecute this? Well, let's pass this law. And then, 20 years later, they bring up this law about shredding documents, and they apply it to J6 people. Because they were in the building, in the Capitol, during the transfer of power. Like, what do those have to do with each other? Well, if you read the words, they can be interpreted this way, so let's use this statute to go after all these people. It's freaking insanity that this is happening in America right now, and it's happening coast to coast. You look at the J6 dragnet that has been happening for the past several years, obviously that inspired these Antifa prosecutors in Charlottesville to do the same thing. Well, if the feds can go after everybody from Florida to Alaska and drag them to Washington, D.C. to stand trial for this, well, then, of course, we can drag everybody 6 years later from Utah, from Florida, from Vermont, from Ohio, from Texas, back to Charlottesville to stand trial for this non-event, for this crime that did not occur. And what are you going to do about it? Because the judges are corrupt, the prosecution is corrupt, the entire town is in on it. That's D.C. That's Charlottesville. That's everywhere they're getting away with this. New York City. Speaking of which, I said there were 2 podcasts that were the greatest podcasts on the internet. The other is How to Take Over the World. So if you scroll up here, posted this last night. So How to Take Over the World just did a 3-part series on George Washington. The second part is his time as a revolutionary general. And it talks about all these defeats that Washington suffered in the beginning of the war. I mean, humiliating defeats, devastating defeats. I mean, just unbroken chains of defeats. Horrible. And they all started in New York. He would go from Brooklyn to, I forget where, but just all over New York, to Manhattan, I think was the next part after Brooklyn, and just defeat after defeat all throughout New York till finally he was able to escape New York. And so it's interesting that George Washington was set upon by what the host of the program calls anti-Americans, the British redcoats. They all had this hope that King George was going to be on the American side, that it was Parliament that was, taxing Americans to death, and it was Parliament who was giving the stranglehold to the American colonies. But once King George found out what was going on, he'd be on our side, and that just didn't happen. And so there was a great deal of anti-Americanism, if you could call it that, at the time. And it's interesting to see that all these defeats that Trump is suffering right now, they're in New York. Like, that's where it's is starting. Hopefully that's an interesting parallel, because as you know, maybe you've heard it, I don't know how they've changed the textbooks in public school these past several years, but George Washington ended up winning. And God bless Trump. He doesn't know how to do anything but win. So in the end, this is going to all turn around. Now what's amazing is the ABA Journal, one of my favorite punching bags, the American Bar Association, they have their news, right? The American Bar Association used to be this august body of professors and legal professionals, these jurists, like the cream of the crop when it comes to lawyers. They would set all the standards. They literally had the model rules for all states and bars and everybody to follow, model legislation. Like, this is how everybody should be doing their, passing their laws, and this is how things should look. It's since devolved into this leftist charade, this total shadow of what it used to be. And now it's like everything else. It's just a leftist newspaper anymore. So their headline today is under rule of law, of all places. Their category is rule of law. The headline says Biden blasts Trump for reckless attacks on the justice system. Like, it's not dystopian enough. We've got to pretend, and there's a related thing about that. We got to pretend that not only is Biden not prosecuting his political enemy so that, he can have him jailed before the election, but we've got to pretend that Trump is the guy who's reckless, because Trump is attacking the justice system that everybody knows now is a fraud. And the left knows it's a fraud, which is the amazing thing about this, because for decades, the left has been attacking the judicial system. The left has been saying there can be no justice here when cops are out of control. There can be no justice when there's racial profiling, when the, incarceration rates are out of control. We got like a 5% of our population is incarcerated, right? We have the highest incarceration rate in the world, and have for some time, for a long time, and by a mile. It's not even close. The left has been attacking this forever. And now that the prosecutors are all Antifa, now that the liberals have taken over the prosecutor's office, now that they're prosecuting white nationalists, white supremacists, they got hate speech laws, they're prosecuting hate crimes. Now that they're going after Patriot Front, now, well, all of a sudden, anybody who criticizes the judicial system is a monster. They are anti-American. How dare they say that the courts are corrupt? How dare they say that prosecutors are engaged in political persecutions of right-wingers? Perish the thought. These very people who knew a mere 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that the courts and the cops were out of control, the prosecutors were out of control, now they will defend them to the death. And that's what I was talking about. There's another article in here about a plaque in the Capitol. I love this article. Where is this ridiculous woman? Come here. Where is she at? This representative whose name I cannot remember for the life of me. Here we go. CBS. I can't believe I'm reading CBS News on air today. Congress defies its own law. Fails to install plaque honoring January 6th police officers. My God. Have things become so dark? This leftist piece of garbage was written by Scott McFarlane. Again, for CBS News. And the representative, Zoe Lofgren, a California Democrat. So in a Congress stuck in gridlock, legislators have grown accustomed to sluggishness in their Capitol Hill work, but Representative Zoe Lofgren, a California Democrat who has represented a Northern California Bay Area district since 1995, is infuriated by one particular holdup. Quote, "My letters have not been answered, and it's a mystery to me," Lofgren said, throwing her hands up in frustration as she spoke with CBS News just off the U.S. House floor a few days ago. Lofgren, and you know what? Screw this. Just spoiler here. What's infuriating Representative Lofgren is that these people voted to put up a plaque honoring the January 6th police officers that saved all their lives. And they gave a March 2023 deadline to put it up. Well, now this woman is just beside herself with rage because this deadline was required by law. And we are dishonoring all of these brave police officers who saved us from this MAGA Trump white supremacist hate-mongering mob. I am deeply concerned about the delay in installing the plaque, which was mandated by law to be placed on the western side of the Capitol building. She's just throwing a fit about this. These are the same people who were saying just 6 months earlier, defund the police. The police are out of control. The police are the enemy. And now they want these people immortalized like they're, Leonidas and the 300. This is how out of control it is. These people on January 6th traveled to Washington to protest what they believed to be a stolen election. Now, I'm not saying it was stolen because I don't want to get kicked off of YouTube, but they believed that it was a stolen election. They go to the Capitol to protest that stolen election and the transfer of power, which they see as illegitimate. The police, far from this, again, fantasy that everybody had, pre-Trump era, that, well, when shit hits the fan, those cops are going to take off their badges and they would never attack Americans and they're on our side and so on and so forth. That whole strain of thought proved to be a bold-faced lie at this point. Those cops were protecting the very people believed to have stolen the election. And now those cops need to be immortalized. And we're supposed to be outraged now that we didn't get a plaque put up in time to honor them. This is how insane political discourse has become. One thing I refuse to post on Twitter, there's an ad. Like everything I have, I don't know why this is a targeted ad for me, but every thread that I read has Ilhan Omar's ad. She's running for Congress again, believe it or not. And her entire ad is Donald Trump is and I thought this was a parody, but Donald Trump is a white supremacist whose supporters are overthrowing the country or tried to overthrow the country, something like that. He's a racist and we have to defeat him. That is where we are at. You know, these people hated George W. Bush, but this level of just naked attacks on this guy's a racist, we have to get him out of there. Not only is he a racist, he's trying to overthrow the government. It's full throttle now. Likewise, at the same time all this is happening, 34 felony counts, guilty on all of them, President of the United States. First time in history. President Biden doesn't even deny it when he's asked directly about it in a press conference. At the same time, the guy who wrote the opinion overturning Roe v. Wade, magically somebody turns up during this election season, right when Trump is being found guilty, somebody turns up photographs of flags flying at his houses. One house here, one house there. One is an upside-down American flag, symbol of distress, and one is an appeal to heaven, which is it's like an evergreen tree, and it says appeal to heaven. It's a white backdrop. This was a Revolutionary War flag, but it was seen at the Capitol on January 6th, and so were upside-down American flags. And so the left is now pulling these out of the ether, wherever they got these photographs, and saying now, this guy who overturned Roe v. Wade, he needs to recuse himself from everything, and he needs to be impeached, and he needs to recuse himself specifically from any cases concerning the 2020 election or January 6th. Amazing that this was saved in their back pocket until the election. So he's being painted now as an insurrectionist. His defense is, well, my wife flew this flag. I had nothing to do with this. And there were, signs put up in our neighbors' yards that were personally insulting to us and attacking us. And my wife did this in response. I had nothing to do with it. Amazingly, many of these leftists on Twitter then criticized him for not controlling his wife. These uber feminists always talking about, freedom for women this and patriarchy and tyranny that. They were literally criticizing Justice Alito for not controlling his wife better and keeping her from flying these flags. Like criticizing him for not being man enough to get his wife not to fly these flags. This shows you the level of dishonesty, of duplicity in these people. There is no, honest discourse with these people. There is no dialogue. This is not the marketplace of ideas where the better idea is going to win out because both sides are aiming for the truth. They don't care about truth. If they cared about truth, they wouldn't be pretending that abortion was about women's rights or women's health. Reproductive health is how they frame that entire situation. That's fundamentally dishonest. Then we got stuff about Thomas Carlyle, about sarcasm. I know. My business coach tells me not to post these things because they have nothing to do with legal marketing. But sometimes, man, I feel like you gotta talk about some other things. I like this. This is a Reuters article. No, I don't like this. That's not what I meant. This is a disgusting article. But it says the impact of gender identity issues on custody proceedings. And I don't even want to really... I don't want to read from this article. I mean, you can go to Emperor Invictus on X and you can read it yourself. I'm not going to read it. I just want to draw attention to how disgusting this is and where we are, right? In terms of the legal profession, in terms of the practice of law. Again, unthinkable 10 years ago. Any of this happening right now. Not just convicting the former president on 34 counts, felony counts. Not just the former president facing criminal trials in 4 different jurisdictions. We're talking about family court. Right? Obergefell was what, 2013? When they legalized gay quote-unquote marriage? And a decade later, we now have, I won't say legitimate, but we now have actual disputes in family courts all across the country where one parent is supportive of gender transitioning and the other parent is against it. Again, 10 years ago, no question, one parent is abusing that child, and the other parent is saying, no, we are not giving our child hormones. We are not allowing them to mutilate their genitals. You are insane, and I am taking full custody of this child. 10 years ago, that was a no-brainer. And now we have this quote-unquote legal scholarship where these lawyers, I can't even say they're debating. They're just plain making things up. Just this legal gobbledygook about trans rights and, best interest of the child. This parent supporting this child's identity. This unbelievable. There's no honest argument with these people. There cannot be. This simply must be prohibited. Again, this is not the marketplace of ideas where two sides are aiming for the truth. This is a war between good and evil. And these people have to be destroyed. Legally, of course, we would never, ever advocate violence on this program, especially not when we are broadcasting on YouTube. This is a legal podcast, not a political one. The official podcast of the Invictus Law Firm, PA, a criminal defense law firm in Orlando, Florida. Please do not kick us off of YouTube. We're getting away from this article right now. Before I make any more off-color comments, or comments that can be interpreted as off-color. So there's a lot more going on about these comments about the Trump verdict. So even Desantis, God love Desantis. He's either doing the worst thing in the world or he's the best governor in American history. Like there's no middle ground with this guy. Either he does everything right or he is just dead wrong. This is the one where he's absolutely doing everything right. He says, today's verdict represents the culmination of a legal process that has been bent to the political will of the actors involved. A leftist prosecutor, a partisan judge, and a jury reflective of one of the most liberal enclaves in America, all in an effort to get Donald Trump. That this case, involving alleged misdemeanor business records violations from nearly a decade ago, was even brought is a testament to the political debasement of the justice system in places like New York City. This is especially true considering the same district attorney routinely excuses criminal conduct in a way that has endangered law-abiding citizens in his jurisdiction. It is often said that no one is above the law, but it is also true that no one is below the law. If the defendant were not Donald Trump, this case would never have been brought. The judge would never have issued similar rulings, and the jury would have never returned a guilty verdict. In America, the rule of law should be applied in a dispassionate, even-handed manner, not become captive to the political agenda of some kangaroo court. One of those moments where Ron DeSantis is just plain right. However, there was a later tweet by DeSantis saying, There's a lot of these people in the leftist media. They're like, well, Trump won't be able to vote for himself in November. When the presidential election comes, ha ha ha, he won't be able to vote. And apparently the sentencing in New York City is days before the Republican convention. So now the looming question is this lunatic judge going to actually jail Trump for the Republican convention? I guess if you're trying to start a civil war, that might do it. But the question remains, no matter what happens, he's now a convicted felon. His right to vote has been taken away from him. It's gone. So Desantis wrote in a later tweet that here in Florida, you can apply for clemency. You can have your voting rights restored. And DeSantis, by the way, chairs that board. And so he's saying Trump will vote in Florida in November in the election because he's a citizen here in Florida. So again, great for DeSantis. All the right things he's saying here. Great. Doing all the right things. Now, how about Charlottesville? Because I remember DeSantis saying, if New York issues a warrant for Trump, or maybe it was Georgia, one of these states where they have these trumped up charges, he said, Florida will not extradite Trump. You can issue those warrants, but Florida will not extradite. You will not take him out of Florida. And I'm thinking, wow, that would have been so awesome for you to say before they jailed me for a month to extradite me to Virginia for these trumped up charges by, where is it in here? A leftist prosecutor, a partisan judge, and a jury reflective of one of the most liberal enclaves in America. Man, if only DeSantis were paying attention to what's going on in Charlottesville. If only anybody were paying attention to what is going on in Charlottesville. The tragedy of what's going on in Charlottesville is that no one cares. No one cares about your stupid town. No one cares about any of you. It's only news because Biden is president and he's using that stunt to say, this is why I ran for president. Because of these evil white supremacists and their, how did he put it? Their veins bulging with anti-Semitic hate. That's why I ran for president. But as far as what actually happened, no one cares. Not the left, not the right, not the Democrats, not the Republicans. No one cares that the Antifa were the only reason there was any violence at all at Unite the Right. No one cares that months before there was a torchlit rally and there was no violence. And why? Because the Antifa were not there to start violence. No one cares. No one cares about the University of Virginia. No one cares about your law school. Outside of Charlottesville, you people don't exist. Except that you are a convenient political tool for people who actually matter. So DeSantis just doesn't care because no one cares. So no one's going to stop an extradition for you people or any of us. Because it's just not important to the grand scheme of things. Where are we at here? Let's go back to the chat. I think my internet might be... Stacy, glad I caught you live. It's been a while. Always enjoy your insight on variety of subjects. From Brownsville, Starbase, Texas. How's it going, Stacy? Thanks for tuning in. Glad you're here, hearing it live. CSRL8, I'm sure that stands for something. I don't know. I'm scared to ask. Hey man, did you read Hans Hermann Hoppe's open letter to Walter Block over his Israel fanaticism? No, I didn't. I might look that up though. I like Hoppe. There's a guy in my jiu-jitsu school who is amazingly still a libertarian. I don't know how anybody's a libertarian anymore. Like I told him, look man, I'm libertarian at heart too, but this is not peacetime. Libertarianism is a peacetime philosophy. It is no longer peacetime. What are you doing? And I gave him Hoppe's book, Democracy, the False God. But I have not read this letter to Walter Block. I'll have to look that up. Deo Vindice, says 12-pack. Yeah, like the first hearing I had, not my bond hearing, but the first hearing I had where I had to drive up to Charlottesville and back, I had no idea. The road back, you run right into Appomattox. So I just went in there. Went in and saw where, the surrender was signed, and went into the tourist center and signed the guest book, and I signed it Deo Vindice. Good evening, says Sir Shovelhead. Right back at you, buddy. I was surprised for about 5 minutes, and then I thought of Rob Rundo and Joe Biggs and realized the justice system has been screwed up. Yeah, it's long been screwed up. Amazingly, Rob Rundo is still in freaking jail right now. Don't get me started on that. What happened to Rundo is infinitely worse than what has happened to Trump. I mean, you think about what's happened to Trump, and there have always been corrupt judges. There's actually, in my law school, there's a bunch of obscure books that nobody reads but me. Literally, I'm literally the only person who has ever taken down these ancient treatises from England to read them at the poll. But one of them is a book written by a lawyer about all the bad judges in England in the 18th century. And it's just the life stories of these corrupt judges who would destroy people's lives. An amazing book. So that's always happened. There have always been corrupt prosecutors, always been ambitious prosecutors who want to prosecute innocent people. And sometimes not so innocent. Like you think of Bugliosi, you think of the Manson trial, and maybe Manson didn't, pull the trigger, but, he also wasn't innocent. But at the same time, the prosecutor was absolutely grandstanding. Things were made up. The prosecution narrative just doesn't hold water. Things like that have been happening forever. So what happened to Trump, it has happened to other people. It's incredible that it happens to the leading political opponent of the guy who set it all up. That is Banana Republic stuff, right? But what happened to Rundo? I feel confident in saying that is unprecedented. What has happened to Rundo is just plain illegal. There's no justifying, there's no calling it political gamesmanship. There's no these prosecutors are politically motivated, even though they are. That's exactly the order that freed Rundo, was the judge saying, this is selective prosecution. It's not even that. What has happened to Rundo while he's sitting there waiting for an appeals court to get its thumb back on the pulse, this situation is unprecedented in American history as far as I'm aware. And you can listen to the previous episodes on that, because that will take us the rest of the night. Volksstärke. Hail, buddy. How's it going? Let's get back to the X machine. Again, all these articles here, they're posted on my Fire X account, including this backdrop that you're seeing right now. Banana, I made this meme. I'm pretty proud of that. I don't usually make memes, but when I do, they're awesome. We talked about Musk's tweet about prescriptions. We talked about cost of glory. Let's talk about this cop in Germany pinning down this alleged white nationalist. So this Muslim guy is running around stabbing people. White guy, allegedly a white nationalist. I don't know. I haven't confirmed that, but that's the narrative right now. White nationalist stops the Muslim guy from stabbing people And the cop, guess who she takes down? It's a good neon belly. Not really. I could critique this cop's form, but I'll tell you, the alleged white nationalist on the bottom has zero guard. He has never trained jiu-jitsu day in his life. But that's not the most striking thing. The most striking thing about this photograph is that the very Muslim stabbing people stabs the cop in the neck while the cop is holding down this alleged white nationalist who was preventing him from stabbing people. And the running commentary, the common theme, is that, as Dietrich said, this honestly perfectly encapsulates modern Western civilization. The cops pinning down the white nationalist while the Muslim stabs the cop in the neck. Now, I'm just saying that's their commentary. I'm not making that commentary because I'm on YouTube, and I do not want to be banned from YouTube. This is a legal podcast, not a political one. So, let's scroll back up here. Now, there is an article from Intelligencer. It's allegedly by a CNN senior legal analyst, saying prosecutors got Trump, but they contorted the law. And I don't want to read the whole article. We've only got like 10 minutes left. But I do want to read these highlights. This guy, Kanakoa the Great, put in some good highlights from the article, and I think it's a good summary. So this CNN senior legal analyst describes how the Trump conviction was a political hit job, which is interesting coming from the left. I think a lot of leftists, after seeing this Trump debacle, they have to face reality at this point, and they have to say, this is the fruit of what we have been doing. Like, I don't want to name names, but just imagine a celebrity who's, a centrist, just to be very even-keeled and fair. You have a centrist who's like, yeah, man, peace and love, tolerance, you do what you want in your bedroom and nobody's gonna, just don't throw it in my face, or, even if you want to have a parade, whatever, man, like this is America. And then their son turns out to be a transsexual. And just a switch flips in this person and says, holy crap, what has happened? What have I been tolerating? What evil has been creeping up on my own family while I've been looking the other way? And then that person realizes that this entire Weltanschauung that they've been supporting, even tacitly, has got to burn to the ground. You've got to think that a lot of leftists are now seeing that. All these political commentators, these legal analysts, they've got to see this trial and what has happened in the midst of this election season and say, oh my God, is this what we've been aiming for the whole time? Because now shit is about to get out of control. So this guy, CNN, senior legal analyst, this guy is summarizing it as such. Number one, the judge donated money. That's Judge Merchan, who presided over the Trump trial. He donated money in plain violation of a rule prohibiting New York judges from making political donations. He donated money to a pro-Biden, anti-Trump political operation. That should be enough right there. This trial is illegitimate. Get this judge off the case. No question. But that didn't happen. Number two, Alvin Bragg, that was the prosecutor, boasted on the campaign trail in an overwhelmingly Democrat county, quote, "It is a fact that I have sued Trump over 100 times," end quote. You heard much the same thing from Letitia What's-Her-Face, bragging about how she's going to take Trump down on her campaign trail. And then look what happened. Number three, most importantly, the DA's charge, that is the district attorney's charges against Trump, pushed the outer boundaries of the law and due process. He's going to get into that later, about the Frankenstein. Yeah, let's just skip ahead to that one. Paragraph 8, I think, is the most important. The Manhattan DA's employees reportedly have called this the zombie case because of various legal infirmities, including its bizarre charging mechanism. but it's better characterized as the Frankenstein case, cobbled together with ill-fitting parts into an ugly, awkward, but more or less functioning contraption that just might ultimately turn on its creator. So, as we were talking earlier about the difference between Soviet law and Anglo-American law, right? If it's not specifically prohibited, it's not illegal. Your conduct is not illegal. You can't be dragged into court and forced to answer for something where everybody's like, well, I didn't know that. Is that illegal? The prosecutors aren't allowed to just interpret things for people they don't like. That's always been the Soviet conception of law as far as we Americans are concerned. But that's not the case anymore, right? They can dust off some crazy, obscure law and say, well, we're going to enhance this to a felony because of a federal elections charge. There's another of the paragraphs in here. This is paragraph 4, in the summary. The charges against Trump are obscure and nearly entirely unprecedented. In fact, no state prosecutor in New York or Wyoming or anywhere has ever charged federal election laws as a direct or predicate state crime against anyone for anything. None. Ever. This reminds me of a case my father was telling me about. I believe it was right after I had graduated from law school. And this just happened to be a prosecutor who had tried to prosecute me for a reckless driving charge when I was a kid. And this woman, it's a long story with this woman, but she was just awful. Just an awful prosecutor. And, my dad had a case where the state attorney's office had charged this guy with something. And my dad told her, look at the statute. Look at the elements of this statute. Here are the facts. He absolutely did not commit this crime. You have to drop this case. And they were set for trial. I guess they were going to trial pretty soon. And she said, no, I'm going to stay here at the office all night, and I'm going to find something to charge your client with. He is not getting off the hook. That kind of rabid, insane approach to law, that kind of fanatical partisanship, that has never been what prosecution has been about in America. If the guy didn't commit the crime, under the law, he walks. And that's always been the conception of American justice, that it's better for a guilty man to go free than for an innocent man to be put behind bars or executed or whatever the case is going to be, to have a conviction, have his guns taken away, to have his children taken away. Because a felony conviction will reflect on your parenthood, by the way. So it is something to take personally. But that was always the conception. Since the time of Benjamin Franklin, it is better for a guilty person to go free than for an innocent man to be convicted. But that's not how prosecutors think anymore. I personally heard a judge tell a prosecutor one time, it is not your job to convict this person. It's just your job to present the facts to the jury, and they decide whether the person is guilty or not. That should be prosecution 101. That should be training in all prosecutors' offices, but it's not. Rather, prosecutors are just let off the leash now. Well, just get them, dog. Get them. And, let the jury see what it is. That kind of abdication of responsibility is probably my biggest peeve with this adversarial system. Because now, prosecutors have discretion on whether to charge something or whether to offer a plea or whether to take the thing to the trial at all or whether to dismiss the charges once they are filed. Prosecutors have discretion like that. I think that's a good thing. I think, these mandatory sentences and all these things where, it's automatic under the law, I think that's a horrible idea. I think prosecutors should have that discretion. The problem is the prosecutors will routinely abdicate their own discretion and say, no, we're going forward, and, the judge can dismiss it if he wants to dismiss it. You want to write a motion to dismiss if you think that legally this is deficient, then you go ahead. We'll leave it up to the judge. And a lot of prosecutors will go further than that, and the judges, too. Prosecutors and judges alike will say, well, I don't know. That's a question for the jury, isn't it? I mean, who are we to say whether this guy's guilty or not? Let's just send it to the jury, see what they say. And it's the ultimate just kick the can down the road game that is a disgrace. And I think in some cases, not even most cases, some cases, yeah, the prosecutor's corrupt. Prosecutor wants this guy and doesn't give a damn about the law or the facts or anything. Like, this is a bad guy, we want him put away. And that's like every case involving a white nationalist. But I think the vast majority of these cases is prosecutors are just like, who am I to say? Let's leave it to the jury. They don't want to be the guy that lets somebody go who's accused of domestic violence or robbery or whatever it is. They don't want to make that hard decision about looking at the evidence and saying this did or did not happen, or looking at the evidence and saying more practically, I can prove this at trial, or I cannot prove this at trial. That is their real job, to look at a case and say, can I prove this? Do the facts support this? They don't do that anymore. They just say, screw it. Let's let it go to the jury. See what they think. That's how we got here. Anyway, super late, Saturday night. Thank you all for tuning in. I still have work to do. So I'm going to go do that now. Got a lot of paperwork to do. Got a lot of paperwork next week. Most important thing about next week, though. Listen. Jacob Dix, his trial begins on Tuesday in Charlottesville. He is the first of all of us to be going to trial. God bless him. And he needs all of us to be praying for him. So all of you going to Mass in the morning, remember Jacob Dix. And for the entirety of next week, we all need you to be praying for Jacob Dix. So with that, good night, everybody, and we will see you next week. Till then.